Hello guys, today we will be talking about what if Naruto and Hinata were silent prodigies part 2. If you enjoy this video please like and subscribe. Now let begin. Naruto charged the little girl with his sword drawn, ready to strike at a moment's notice. She responded by dipping her hands into the pouches at her side and, in a blur of motion, launching handfuls of narrow throwing knives at the blonde. Curse jabbed his ninjato into the ceiling of the cramped tunnel, twisted sideways, and pulled himself up with the sword's seal cementing the blade in place. The knives passed harmlessly mere centimeters from his back, and he dropped down while yanking his customized weapon after him. The marks in the steel glowed with brighter intensity, and a long whip of rock followed after the blade. The genius boy hit the ground and began twirling his sword in a circular pattern, prompting the elongated stone rope to rotate across the passage and crash into the walls with great force. She merely grinned devilishly before jamming her fingers into the slips of metal at the front of her belt. She pulled her hands back and caught the swift cord over her head, the pieces of intricate metal snugly fit over her fingers glowing with strange glyphs. The whip instantly fell apart into pieces and she let loose another salvo of throwing knives at the prodigy. What the hell? He shouted as he thrust his left hand forward and unleashed a dozen bladed yo-yos from the rings. The devices spun hard in the air and impacted the incoming blades, shredding them to bits before he sent chakra down the wires and forced them to hit the ground and roll speedily towards the girl. He tucked his sword into a loose red sash at his side and flung another series of deadly toys from the rings on his right hand. The mysterious girl shouted, "Is it it? That's all I gotta deal with?" before brushing the ground with her armored fingers. The seals on the metal flashed, and she flexed a few digits seemingly at random. The ground suddenly rolled away from her, then cracked as dozens of jagged spikes jutted outwards and halted the yo-yos spinning along the ground. She then stood and held her arms away from her body, fingers outstretched and clearly showcasing the burning glyphs of the small metal shafts. Naruto cursed under his breath and sent a surge of chakra down the wires of the lethal playthings in midair. With a burst of smoke, the sides burst away from all the yo-yos, and the spinning buzzsaw's momentum flung pairs of hidden shuriken forward. The weapons then dipped and backlashed into the ceiling as the blonde whipped their control strength. Curse saw that his sword was destroyed and was pissed. "It's hard forging good swords these days," he complained mentally as he launched himself at the enemy and swung wide with his remaining broadsword. She released her hands and countered the blade with an armored set of fingers, and the weapon shattered like its late counterpart. She immediately followed up on her attack and threw something at the boy, something very, very hot. Naruto screamed bloody murder when the pain hit him in the chest, and his arms instinctively clutched the source of his extreme discomfort, only to be burned themselves. He hit the ground hard and began rolling on the ground in excruciating agony as his burning fingers clawed at his chest. He eventually regained a somewhat coherent state of mind and looked down to discover that the rocks the girl held had been transformed into molten stone and were searing into his flesh. He remembered that the enemy was still there and would probably follow up on her attack, so he reached for his slung ninjato, only to encounter a pair of hands. One grasped him on the elbow and slid up his arm, inciting a new world of pain, while the other stole his special sword with a swift pull. Uoshia cooed, while leaving the custom blade fancy. She averted her gaze to the writhing form before her. Her stroke against his arm had deconstructed much of the flesh and bone on the limb, and the boy seemed to be slipping into shock. Flipping the sword upside down, she raised it over her head in preparation to end. She blinked in surprise when the critically injured arm of her opponent shot up, impaled itself on the sword, then grasped the guard below the hilt. The girl tugged once to pull the weapon back to no avail, and released it when the boy stood to his feet. His wounds, she thought, stupefied that said injuries were smoking as they closed. Her eyes shifted to his arm as he pulled the blade from his hand and strained the visible muscle, focusing a strange chakra into the limb that immediately began to heal the severe damage. She then realized that he was no more than 2 feet away from her and moved to put some space between them, but was halted when Curse struck his smoking arm forward and grabbed her by the throat. "Lego me," she demanded weakly as she touched her armored fingers against the limb and began deconstructing it again with the metal's embedded seals. But before she could force him to let go, Curse stabbed his ninjato into the ground and curled his larger hand around her finger guards and crushed the metal with an iron grip. She screamed in pain as the steel cut harshly into her digits, and she forgot about trying to focus on the hand around her throat. Instead, she moved her free hand over the smoking limb and tried to mortally wound the offending fist, but Naruto was quicker. The masked prodigy merely grabbed the other hand and crushed the unique weapons around her fingers, ignoring the girl's renewed shrieks of pain. "Please let go." Her stutter returned as tears flooded her eyes. I seek and lose and now too bad, was his simple response. He concluded the fight by pulling her up to his face and, reeling his head back, cracking his hard custom visage against her skull and knocking her out cold. She went limp in his grasp, and he released her to gather up all the fallen and destroyed weaponry around them. After a few minutes, he scooped her light body up and headed back to his secret basement. She'll be a useful source of information, he thought. Overall, a productive evening. Hinata leapt back for what seemed the millionth time since she began fighting Fumetsu. The man had no apparent strategy, no weaponry beyond himself and his cutlass, and absolutely no sense of danger, and that suited him perfectly. Shit, she thought as he knocked away yet another exploding spike and garnered a face full of shrapnel without so much as blinking. Doesn't he even feel that? It's gotta hurt? She reloaded the final sharpened rod and decided against its immediate use. These are damn worthless against this guy. The undying swordsman said nothing as he strode forward with his sword dangling in one hand and plucking the shards out with the other. He had no expression of emotion, no motivation in his step, and no lust for blood. The genius girl bit her lower lip in consideration of her next move, then reached back and unwound a handful of wires from a bulky coil clipped to her belt. She eyed the footsteps of her opponent, noting that he was not yet clear of the shrapnel embedded in the walls, floor and ceiling, and touched the ends of the metal strands to her fingers. The wires became magnetized by the chakra running through her hands and wrapped them before unlocking their circular holster. The steel cords shot forward, attracted to the special metal of the needle-like shrapnel, and wrapped around them in complicated random patterns that littered the passageway. Fumetsu approached the web of wires and brought his blade down on them to knock them out of the way. The Hyuga smirked when he did so, and connected the strands coil to the repurposed yin and yang, bringing the metal strings to life with crackling What the hell, she cursed mentally. That's enough power to kill an elephant. How's he not affected? She rushed up to the slow man and thrust her loaded spike launcher to his neck. She didn't want to destroy his head, since retrieving minute bits of information from a deceased brain was not beyond her. She fired, and, due to the extreme close proximity of the attack, the bolt passed all the way through the flesh and exited the other side without exploding. Finally, got him shitter by Akigan immediately saw him thrust his large cutlass at her, and she caught it with her left hand. The blade scraped against the electrified film on her palm, and, although the durable stuff corded her extremity, she could feel the uneven sharpness glance off the underlying flesh. How is he not dead? She thought frantically. He's got a gaping hole in his neck. Fumetsu pushed forward against the wires blocking his way and into the prodigy girl, while slowly forcing his weapon closer and closer to her. His other hand shot forward and gripped the bottom of her blue mask, initiating yet another shock as it activated a surge of electricity. He ignored the pain as usual and began lifting the visage as silence moved back, revealing the soft lips of the young girl, before she opened her mouth and spewed out a thick gas. Poison, the man's dull mind categorized, before he got a good whiff of the toxic fumes and lost his grip in a fit of coughing. Something that affects him, the genius girl realized with excitement when she leapt out of the Hinata frowned. Isn't that where I caught his sword? She wondered, glancing at the minuscule cut on her hand and confirming her suspicions. So that's my blood, but what the hell is he doing? She decided that whatever Fumetsu's next was, it couldn't be good. She reached down and pulled her energy weapon from its holster, and the device's cord that connected it to yin and yang hummed as the reworked top's expanded generator spun madly, bringing the weapon to bear against the man. She saw that he had finished his circle and was starting on another pattern as the weapon in her hand began vibrating with increasing intensity. The enemy's leg managed to paint a single straight line with his own blood, and the cracks in the device were glowing as it reached full capacity. The Hyuga prodigy clamped down on the trigger, and a concentrated blast of heat and light shot from the weapon and struck her opponent. After a few seconds of waiting for the overheated energy device to cool off, she holstered it and strode towards the smoking body to witness the effects of her weapon. Upon reaching the corpse, she determined it to have multiple burns ranging from 1st to 3rd degree, along with total penetration at the point of impact, in this case, the neck. The enemy's head was laying several feet away in a pool of warm blood. He's not getting up from that one, she stated as she knelt down and ruffled through the man's clothes for any kind of identification. She wasn't real hopeful, since this man was obviously an assassin of some sort, so she was pleasantly surprised to find a necklace with a gold symbol attached. Her brow furrowed when the mark looked familiar, and she pocketed the jewelry to begin moving the body when she froze. What was that? A distant voice asked. It's coming from down there, another voice replied. Shit, the blue-haired girl grimaced behind her mask. I gotta run. No time for this stuff. Damn. She cut off the wires running from the coil on her belt and took off as quietly as she could. After a few moments, a band of 4 people approached Fumetsu's body and a masked man spoke. "Took us a while to find you. You're late." Duel, the disembodied head said as its eyes rolled toward the individual. "My apologies," the ninja replied flatly. "We started from HQ when you reported in. You're quite a ways away." "Whatever." Nina, the undying man, addressed the sole female of the mysterious squad. "Patch me up." As the medic woman obeyed, Duel struck up a brief conversation. "Did you follow orders and analyze abilities correct?" "I use no techniques." The mismatched hide behind the visage glanced at the incomplete bloody seal on the floor. "How about that? I figure the target would have an ace up their sleeve if need be." After a few minutes, Fumetsu's head was reattached to his body and he reached for his ratty hat. He placed it on his head and sheathed his cutlass. "Let's return to base." The next morning, both geniuses were exhausted from their overnight ordeal. The fighting had taken its toll on the evening, and they hadn't slept as much as they would have liked. Of course, they did their absolute best not to show it so nobody noticed. Almost off, Naruto was busy performing one of the many farces called missions with his team under the not-so-watchful eye of his Jonin instructor. Kakashi preferred to spend more time reading his adult novels rather than mess with the chores the villagers put forward, but he was by no means detached from reality. While he read his restricted book, his uncovered eye flicked back and forth between his charges. Sakura still hasn't made any real oath. He outlined everything in his mind before thinking about the specifics. She's got higher than average chakra control and a lot of book smarts, but that's about it. Still no adequate physical conditioning and nothing beyond academy techniques. Why don't they teach anything more useful than that worthless clone technique? No one uses it. He broke himself from that particular train of thought and stuck to the issues at hand. Sasuke is, well, Sasuke. Real growth potential, but a serious lack of the concept of teamwork. If you ask me, he's a time bomb ready to go off at any time. He furrowed his eyes as he reached his final student. Naruto, he's got more gusto than anything else. He's got real potential, seeing as how he can pull off the shadow clone technique at such a young age. The only thing that worries me is teaching him anything that might accidentally break the seal on the fox. He shook his head at the notion. Nah, couldn't be that much of an issue. The 4th seal is top of the line. Still, something seems different about the boy. He's loud as hell, but when the others leave him alone he gets this weird look in his eye. As the perpetually tardy ninja pondered over the strange feeling his pupil exuded, Kurenai was acting on her suspicions a little more so. She had specifically requested fewer missions from the Hokage in order to accentuate her subordinates' training, seeing as how she didn't see doing jobs even civilians didn't care to perform as being worthwhile. The old man was hesitant, and she didn't really expect him to bow to her wishes based on a mere whim, but he surprised her and did it anyway. "The third must know something I don't," she concluded. "He's quite adamant about Genin performing as many missions as they can as soon as possible. Could he be as suspicious as I am?" She broke from her internal monologue and focused on her young team. She had laid a series of traps inside their training ground that could only be disabled through teamwork. The Genin had to have each other's backs at all times in order to pass through the course unscathed. So far, the results were predictable for the most part. Kiba was loud and boisterous, often the first one to break from the rule and fall into an ambush. Shino stuck close to his teammates and spoke up whenever he felt his input was needed, that is to say, very little. Hinata filled in the gaps wherever the boys could not venture. But the Yu was beginning to notice minor tics in her female student. One such example was a near constant flinch in the shoulders, as if she were about to raise her arms before deciding against it. As the Jonin watched the Hyuga closer, she would notice the girl's fingers and other extremities perform similarly, as if about to pull something or start to reach for an object that was not there before halting. All that's nothing compared to this, though, she mused, glad that she designated the day for training rather than work. Watching the Byakugan user's eyes, she saw them glance back and forth ever so subtly. She knew that her bloodline was capable of locating most of her traps, but, seeing as how the girl miraculously avoided those that were invisible to her advanced eyes, still managed to fall into a handful of ambushes. She saw those, I know she did. Waiting for her novice squad to complete the pitfall on an exercise, she called the 3 over to discuss their performance. She congratulated the trio on a job well done before laying out their mistakes and successes. A knot formed in her stomach when she realized that the shy girl's errors, when listed, were most numerous amongst the Genin. Even Kiba managed to pull his smelly ass out of the fire after the lecture. She convened for lunch and pulled the Hyuga to the side before she could wander off. When the others were out of earshot, she spoke. Hinata, she started as sympathetically as possible. I know you're trying hard, and nothing's more important than that, but is there something on your mind? What? The shy girl retorted, then peered down in defeat. And no, nothing, Hinata, you're very strong, you just don't know it yet. I notice that you seem more aware of your surroundings today, but you didn't act on them, that's all. Crap, 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 crap. Her mind shuffled around on itself. I was careless, thinking too much on that dead guy. Crap. She then looked up and forced a few tears into her eyes to water them up a bit. I'm sorry, nothing to be sorry about, the Yui responded while placing a gentle hand on the girl's head. Come on, I'll have lunch with you. Oh, okay, she agreed quietly while groaning inwardly. She had been in a rush after her evening battle to get home and forgot to hand over the necklace to Shiori and Ichiru so they could begin investigating it. I was hoping to do that during lunch. Looks like I'll have to wait. That night brought about extensive research on the behalf of both geniuses. For Naruto, it was interrogating his young prisoner. He had spent much of the previous evening building a cell for her and filling it to the brim with traps to ensure that she couldn't escape. He entered the separate room that he cut out of the stone overnight. The walls were bare, uneven rock, and the only passable surface for a floor was a small flat slab in the center of the cramped prison. The insides of the bars, ceiling, and floor were lined with chakra-sensing seals. Any escape attempts utilizing the body's natural energy would instantly be quelled by the painful marks. If by happenstance the girl managed to circumvent the seals, automated puppets were hidden behind the wall. The Uzumaki donned his secondary clothing and cracked mask before entering. His flawless security system sensed his unique signature and ignored him as he approached the bars and slid a small cheap tin tray of cold food under a designated slot. There were no doors to the jail. He had drugged the girl to keep her unconscious long enough to build the prison around her. Shia, was it? He asked when the young girl stirred from her messy cot. She was almost incapable of movement, as her arms were bound tightly together behind her back from the shoulders down, and her legs were in manices with a chain only long enough for her to shuffle her feet. I've got questions for you. Where am I? She inquired. I'm asking the questions here. Depending on your answers, your stay here will be more pleasant. Do you understand? Why am I here? The waterworks were beginning to flow. Curse said nothing as the little girl curled into a ball on her cot and began sniffling. If she's not faking this, she's got some serious problems. He stood there for a few minutes and, when she has shown no signs of stopping anytime soon, reached through the bars and set down a large cup of water with a straw. She now had everything she needed to survive for a few days. He exited the hasty prison and began working on a new mask. This time he built a visage from the ground up rather than modifying a captured one. He began with a thin piece of wood that was carefully carved into the basic shape he wanted, that of kabuki mask with an open mouth. He figured as long as he could hide his unique birthmarks, revealing his mouth wouldn't be a problem. He was tired of going out of his way to avoid any techniques that would destroy his headwear. After a few hours of hammering on multiple layers of metal strips, he had achieved the desired look and integrity. Afterwards, he added mock teeth filled with poison gas around the mouth and painted the whole thing red so as to mask the mane of mock hair he wore to shield his own brilliant blonde hair from the world. He then added a layer of paper seals to the front, which he covered with an even thinner metal layer. The idea was to have a disposable outer visage that could conceal explosive tags and whaten it out in the open. It was brilliant in his opinion. Last but certainly not least were the mirror glasses over the eye openings that hid his bright azure ocular lenses. When he completed his new mask, he put his ear to the prison chamber's entrance and heard the steady breathing of a sleeping Shia. He shrugged and ascended his vertical tunnel into his room to catch some sleep. He was dead tired. Hinata was having a busy night of her own. She had to endure listening to her father's inane drabble about duty or something along those lines before she could sneak out to her secret lab. She decided to let Shiori and Ichiru off the hook about researching the symbol on the jewelry of her undying enemy, and do it herself. Besides, she was looking forward to figuring it out on her own. She had spent the last few hours going through every text on seals she had compiled and nothing matched. How weird, she thought as she leaned back in her chair and took a swig of water. I'm pretty certain that it's a technique that looked like Fumetsu was drawing the same mark on the ground. She turned her canteen up again and dove back into her encyclopedia. She shelved all the documents before her and pulled out a history book on a whim. Whenever she came upon a problem whose solution existed but was not obvious, she found that searching in off-handed places usually gave her a new idea of where to look. As she flipped through the old text, she thought about what else the mark could be as she stumbled across a brief history of clans in the Fire Country. She stared absent-mindedly at the book, and, sure enough, a revelation hit her. Family crests. Maybe she began running through all the registered genealogical symbols in the known world and came up blank after an hour. That wasn't it. What else is there? What else? She wondered as she scanned her bookshelf, and her eyes strayed to a large scroll on religions. Religious symbols. She pulled the huge collection onto the floor and flipped it open. Inside was a complete accumulation of religious information along with their corresponding marks. After several minutes of scanning, she found what she was looking for, a circle with an embedded triangle. Jashin, she read aloud to no one. A belief in the deity, known as Jashin, whose principal commandment is indiscriminate slaughter. She skipped over the details of the gruesome prayers of its followers to the additional notes at the bottom. Those that follow this belief are known to be blessed with the ability to inflict harm done unto them upon others and immortality to all natural and unnatural death. On, son of a bitch. Takemi was having a so-so day. Her guitar was properly tuned, her glass bottle of whiskey was full and had friends, and she had recently obtained a pack of her favorite unfiltered cigarettes, a brand that was difficult to find as of late. While all these things were great, she had no news from her daughter. "Ah, this sucks," she whined inwardly. "Least you think that damn kid could do is write back. God damn it, I might not." 11 Jul. "Tell Ann, will you know. With all due respect, Commander, I believe. What the fuck are you doing?" She interrupted with annoyance in her gruff voice. "You disobeying me, undead fuckface?" "No ma'am. Damn right." Dismissed. As Fumetsu turned to exit, she stated, "You know, Shia didn't return from her patrol last night." The undying man nodded in affirmation. "Duel's pretty pissed. It's all I can do to keep that freak from going vigilante on me." The mortal assassin shuddered ever so slightly under his loose doll clothes. He knew full well that Takemi's statement really meant that she threatened the masked man into submission. The female commander could easily kick any of her subordinates' asses, and he knew it. He said nothing as he removed himself from the smoke-choked room that reeked of hard liquor. "Too bad too." She mentioned to the side as she strung a low chord. "Little kid reminds of her when she was young."